The phone call came on a Wednesday afternoon in March, while I was sitting in a parking garage trying to remember why I'd driven there. That's what chemo does to you. Not just the nausea, not just the hair, it takes the small things, the ordinary things. You'll be mid-sentence and the word you need just isn't there anymore. You'll drive somewhere and sit with your hands on the wheel, genuinely unsure why you left the house. My oncologist called it chemo fog. I called it terrifying. So there I was, engine running, trying to reconstruct my afternoon when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Is this Nathan Holloway? Speaking. Mr. Holloway, my name is Patrick Reeve. I'm a partner at Reeve and Stanton. I represent the estate of Gerald Allen Briggs. A pause. I believe you knew him as your uncle. I hadn't spoken to Uncle Gerald in almost 11 years. Not since the Christmas where my wife made a comment about his house smelling like old newspapers, said it loudly enough for the whole table to hear, and he'd looked at me, not at her, at me, and said very quietly, "You should teach your wife some manners, Nathan." And I hadn't. I'd laughed it off. She'd laughed too. Gerald had not. He died in February, apparently. Heart attack. 74 years old, alone in the house that did, honestly, smell like old newspapers, and no one had thought to call me, because no one had thought to call me, because no one had thought I'd care. Maybe they were right. Maybe I should have cared more. 11 years ago. He named you in his will, the attorney said. How much? I asked. It was a rude question. I asked it anyway. Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Pause. Holloway, I think it would be better if we met in person. I was 43 years old and I had colon cancer. Stage 2. Caught early enough that my surgeon used the word optimistic without flinching. But still, colon cancer at 43 while running a small structural engineering firm with 2 employees and a mortgage on a house I'd bought with a woman I was no longer sure I knew. My wife and I had been married for 9 years. Her name was Renata. She was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful. A well-designed bridge, a precisely written contract, efficiently, deliberately, without warmth. I'd loved her once the way you love a place you're visiting for the first time. Dazzled, slightly disoriented, convinced you'd like to stay forever. By the time I got sick, I mostly just felt disoriented. She'd been supportive at first, drove me to my first 3 chemo appointments, sat in the waiting room with her laptop, answered emails while I got poison dripped into my arm. By the 5th appointment, I was taking an Uber. She was busy. Work was demanding. I understood, or I told myself I did, because understanding was easier than the alternative. What I didn't understand, what I didn't let myself look at directly, was the way she'd started tilting her phone away when she texted, the way she laughed differently on certain calls, lower and slower, the way you laugh when someone is watching you perform being happy, the way she'd started going to the gym at 6 in the morning and not coming back until 8 when the gym was a 12-minute drive away. I didn't ask. I was tired. I was sick. I told myself I would deal with it when I was better. The attorney's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view of the river. Patrick Reeve was in his late 60s, gray at the temples, the kind of man who made you feel, simply by existing, that everything would be handled properly. He offered me coffee. I took it. My hands were still unsteady from the last round of treatment. Your uncle's estate, he said, is valued at approximately $4.2 million. I set down the coffee cup. The bulk of it is in real estate, 3 commercial properties in Claremont County, plus the family home. There are also brokerage accounts totaling approximately $900,000 and a life insurance policy. He cleared his throat. You are the sole beneficiary, Mr. Holloway. I didn't say anything for a long moment. He had no children, I finally said. No children, no spouse. A few distant cousins, none of whom he appears to have been close to. Reeve laced his fingers together on the desk. Your uncle was a careful man. He updated this will 18 months ago, quite deliberately. 18 months ago, I'd been in the middle of my diagnosis. I wondered if Gerald had known. I wondered if someone had told him his nephew was sick and he'd thought, what? That he owed me something? That the Christmas argument had gone on long enough? I would never get to ask him. There's some paperwork to process. Reeve said. Probate will take several months, but barring any challenges, the estate transfers to you cleanly. He looked at me steadily. I'd recommend keeping this information private for the time being. In my experience, news of inheritance has a way of complicating relationships. I thought about Renata tilting her phone away. Right, I said. Of course. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 15 minutes. I went inside and made dinner and didn't say a word. 6 weeks later, I came home early from a doctor's appointment. Clean scan. No new growth. The oncologist had actually shaken my hand and found a car in my driveway I didn't recognize. A gray Audi, newer than anything we owned, parked slightly crooked the way you park when you're somewhere you shouldn't be, and you're trying to believe you have every right to be there. I went inside. They were in the kitchen. My wife and a man I'd never seen before. Tall, maybe 35, one of those faces that looked carefully maintained. They weren't touching when I walked in. They were standing on opposite sides of the kitchen island, mugs in hand. But there was something in the geometry of it, in the precise distance between them, that told me everything. Nathan. Renata's voice was level. Not guilty. Level. Who's this? I said. The man introduced himself, a name I've since decided not to remember. He said something about knowing Renata through work, which was probably technically true. He was just leaving, Renata said. He left. She watched him go. I stood there. How long? I said. Nathan, how long, Renata? She set down her mug. Something shifted in her face. Not guilt. I want to be very clear about that. Not guilt. It was something more like relief, the way a person looks when they've been holding a weight they've decided to put down. About a year, she said. A year. I had been in chemotherapy for 11 of those months. I've been meaning to talk to you, she said. I just didn't want to. She stopped. Started again. I wasn't going to do it while you were sick. That's kind of you, I said. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I meant it the way it sounded. She slept in the guest room that night. I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling, and I want to be accurate about this, I felt mostly nothing, which might have been the most frightening part. 9 years of marriage, and the dominant emotion was something close to exhaustion. I called my attorney the next morning. Not Reeve, a different one. A woman named Sandra Kwan, who specialized in family law and had been recommended to me by a friend from college. Tell me everything, she said. I told her. The affair. The timeline. The estate. Does she know about the inheritance? Sandra asked. No, I said. I haven't told anyone. There was a brief silence. Keep it that way, Sandra said. Don't file anything yet. Don't change accounts. Don't do anything visible. Give me a week to look at your financials. I gave her a week. What she found, Renata had, over the previous 8 months, moved approximately $60,000 from our joint account into an account I wasn't named on. Small transfers, irregular amounts, nothing that triggered any automatic flags. Methodical. Patient. She was planning this, Sandra said. The affair, the exit. She's been building a runway. For how long? Hard to say, but she's good at it. A pause. Nathan, I want you to do something for me. I want you to let her file first. What? Let her bring it to you. Don't initiate. If she's planning to leave, she'll move soon. She'll want to establish the timeline on her terms. When she does, call me immediately. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. Just call me. I went home. I made dinner. I watched television. I was very good at acting normal by then. I'd had nearly a year of practice, it turned out. It took 11 days. She sat me down on a Sunday evening with the energy of someone who had rehearsed this, who had perhaps rehearsed it many times. She told me the marriage wasn't working, that she'd been unhappy for a long time, that she hoped we could handle this like adults. She had a folder with some papers in it, not official, preliminary, she said, something her attorney had drafted. I'm not signing anything tonight, I said. She blinked. She'd expected something else. Anger, maybe, or collapse. We should just look it over together, she said. Sandra will look it over, I said. That's what I'm paying her for. Something flickered across Renata's face then. The first real uncertainty I'd seen. You have an attorney already? I've had one for 11 days, I said. Since the morning after I found out. She didn't say anything. I went to bed. What came next was the part I didn't expect. The part I wasn't prepared for even after everything. Her attorney contacted Sandra with a proposal that I can only describe as ambitious. Renata was claiming that my chemo, the treatment that had been keeping me alive, had impaired my cognitive function to the degree that certain financial decisions I'd made in the past year should be reviewed. She wanted an evaluation. She wanted oversight. Sandra called me when she read it. There was a pause before she spoke that told me she was choosing her words carefully. She's trying to establish that you're not competent to manage your own finances, she said. She knows, I said, about the estate. Someone told her. Yes. Another pause. Nathan, this is aggressive. It's also, frankly, not going to work. But it's going to cost you time and money to fight, and that's the point. She wants to pressure you into a faster, larger settlement. I thought about Gerald, alone in that house, updating his will 18 months ago. I thought about the word optimistic. I thought about the clean scan. What do we do? I said. We respond, Sandra said, and then we go on offense. The cognitive evaluation was scheduled, and I attended it and I passed it comprehensively. The psychologist used the word unremarkable in the clinical sense, meaning nothing of concern. My oncologist provided documentation. My surgeon provided documentation. Sandra assembled a timeline that made very clear that my medical treatment had not impaired my professional functioning. I had completed 3 significant engineering contracts during chemo. I had filed taxes. I had made no erratic financial decisions. The case for incompetence was exactly as thin as Sandra had said it would be. Then Sandra went on offense. She filed a detailed financial disclosure motion. The $60,000 in transfers came to light formally, then a communications, subpoenaed, reviewed, timestamped, that showed the planning had begun 14 months ago. Then, most critically, a document Renata's own attorney had apparently not seen. A text exchange in which Renata had written to the man from the gray Audi, and I am quoting from memory, "Once the divorce goes through and we deal with the inheritance situation, we can stop doing all this sneaking around." She had known about the inheritance before I told her. Someone had told her. It turned out to be a cousin of mine, distant, someone I'd barely spoken to in years, who had somehow found out through probate records and passed it along. He thought he was being helpful. He was not. The text established intent. The financial transfers established planning. Sandra laid it out in a filing that was so clean and so complete that when Renata's attorney read it, he apparently called her and spent 45 minutes on the phone. And when she came out of that call, she looked, according to the mutual friend who witnessed it, like something had permanently rearranged inside her face. The cognitive challenge was withdrawn. Quietly. No announcement. The settlement negotiation took another 2 months. I will not pretend it was easy. There were days I sat in Sandra's conference room staring at documents and felt nothing but a deep animal exhaustion. The kind that has nothing to do with sleep. The thing about betrayal, the part no one tells you, is that it doesn't arrive all at once. It keeps arriving. Every new document, every time-stamped text, every forensic accounting detail is another delivery of the same package, and each time you have to open it. But Sandra was very good, and I had been through chemotherapy, which turns out to be reasonable preparation for sitting in uncomfortable rooms waiting for things to be decided. The final agreement, Renata received the equity from our house, a negotiated sum for the years of marriage, and nothing else. The estate was entirely excluded. Prenuptial protection would have been cleaner, but the intent to defraud documentation gave Sandra enough leverage to achieve essentially the $60,000 in transfers was offset from her settlement. She did not get the oversight she'd asked for. She did not get a second look at Gerald's estate. Her attorney filed the paperwork. She signed it. So did I. On the drive home from Sandra's office, I stopped at a coffee shop I'd never been to before, sat in a corner booth, and drank a medium cup of coffee that was slightly too hot and tasted exactly like what it was supposed to taste like. Nothing more. Nothing complicated. I sat there for about an hour and no one looked at me, and I thought about Gerald's house and the smell of old newspapers and the Christmas dinner and the thing he'd said to me. "You should teach your wife some manners." I had not. but I had eventually learned to recognize what bad manners actually cost you. The estate finalized 4 months later. The commercial properties in Claremont County were managed through a trust Sandra helped me establish, the family home I sold, because I had never been particularly attached to it, and there was no one left who was. The brokerage accounts I folded into a long-term portfolio that my financial advisor, a careful, unhurried man who reminded me slightly of Patrick Reeve, managed with very little drama. I moved into a smaller place. 2 bedrooms, 3rd floor, a window in the kitchen that caught the morning light in a way that I liked more than I expected to. I kept going to my oncology check-ins every 3 months. I kept getting clean scans. I went back to work. I completed a project for a mid-size commercial developer, a parking structure, not glamorous, but the load calculations were interesting, and I was good at them. And I remembered, somewhere around the 3rd week, that I had always actually liked my work. I had forgotten that for a while. My cousin, the one who passed along the inheritance information, called me once to explain. I listened. I didn't say much. I haven't returned any subsequent calls. The man from the gray Audi, I heard through the same mutual friend, moved away. I don't know where. I found that I didn't particularly care. Renata I have not seen since the day we signed the final paperwork. She was wearing a blue coat. She didn't look at me on the way out. I watched her walk to the elevator, and I felt, again, I want to be accurate, I felt the specific, strange lightness of a weight you've been carrying for so long. You stop noticing it, and then one day you set it down, and you take a few steps, and you think, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. I am not going to tell you I came out of it grateful for the experience. That would be dishonest. I came out of it older, more careful, and somewhat better at recognizing when someone is tilting their phone away from you. What I will tell you is this: Gerald, who smelled like old newspapers and held a grudge for 11 years and died alone in a house full of them, was more careful with his loyalty than I had ever been with mine. He waited to see if I deserved it. I'm not sure I did by any fair accounting, but he left it to me anyway, and I think about that sometimes. I think about a man sitting alone in a house deciding who he trusted, taking his time with it, getting it right. I'm still learning how to do that. If this story resonated with you, you already know what to do. And if there's someone in your life who needs to hear it, who's sitting in a parking garage somewhere, engine running, trying to remember why they started, share it with them. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this ended, not in any mystical sense. I'm an engineer, I deal in load calculations and structural logic, but in the plain, observable way that actions stack up over time and eventually produce a result that was, in retrospect, almost inevitable. Renata made choices, small ones at first, then larger ones, then ones that required their own infrastructure of deception to support. And each choice she made narrowed the path she was on, the way a crack in a foundation doesn't stay the same size. It grows. It follows the line of least resistance until one day the thing that was supposed to hold everything up can't anymore. I made choices too. I looked away when I should have looked directly. I chose exhaustion over honesty, comfort over clarity. I told myself I'd deal with it later, when I was better, when things were calmer, when the timing was right, and the timing is never right. I know that now. You don't get to postpone the hard things indefinitely. They wait, but they collect interest. What I've come to believe, and I say this as someone who spent the better part of a year getting poison dripped into his arm and still managed to show up and do his work, is that integrity is not a grand gesture. It's not some dramatic moment where you plant your flag and make your stand. It's the small, daily decision to be honest when dishonesty would be easier. Gerald understood that. He sat in that house by himself for 11 years, holding to what he believed about loyalty and about what people owed each other. And he never compromised it for the sake of keeping the peace. I used to think that was stubbornness. I've revised my opinion. The intelligence part. And I mean intelligence in the broad sense, not IQ, but the ability to actually see what's in front of you. That took me longer to develop. I was a smart man who talked himself out of what he knew. That's not rare. A lot of people are walking around with evidence they've decided not to examine because the examination would require them to do something difficult. Sandra didn't find anything I couldn't have found myself if I'd been willing to look. She just had no reason to look away, and the resilience. That one I didn't choose so much as survive into. There's a certain kind of strength that you don't discover until you're sitting in a chemo chair at 43 wondering what your life actually amounts to, and then you keep going anyway. Not heroically, just because the alternative is worse. You show up. You do the next thing. You let your attorney handle the paperwork, and you drink your coffee, and you get your scan results, and you go back to work. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this. If they're taking anything, not a cautionary tale about marriage, not a warning about money, just this. The choices that define you are almost never the big, obvious ones. They're the ones where you could have looked away and no one would have blamed you. And you looked anyway. Gerald got that right. I'm still practicing.